Thank you very much, President Andrew. The next speaker on our program doesn't need any introduction to the people of South Dakota, I'm sure, and he has become and has been really a world figure. He's a great internationalist, and he's a great fighter for the agricultural people. So we're mighty glad that our national president of the Farmers Union can be with us tonight, and it's always a great honor for me to present to you and all of you folks our national president, James Patton.
President Upsall, Congressman McGovern, and my distinguished colleagues here on the platform, ladies and gentlemen. First, Paul, I would like to thank you, the United Nations Association, the City of Huron, the Farm Bureau, the Grange, and all of the other people who have made this wonderful day possible. We in National Farmers Union, who have the honor and privilege of sponsoring this tour, deeply appreciate the excellent planning and attention you have given to this event. We have a historic opportunity tonight to discuss the United Nations and express our confidence in the community of nations solving their momentous problems. With us at the I.A.P conference at Purdue University were some 59 representatives of 17 countries. Most of this group are with us tonight. Our guests have just concluded the 10th anniversary meeting of the International Federation of Agricultural Producers, the association of farm organizations throughout the free world. For 10 days at Purdue University in Indiana, we discussed as delegates and as observers the common problems and common aspirations of farmers around the world. Their presence here is more than a visit to a country which many of them have not seen before. It is a symbol of the international understanding among men of goodwill, which has been the hope of peace-loving people since the beginning of civilization. These distinguished guests represent the ideals as well as the sinews of our modern-day attempts to live together in democratic understanding. They represent those who till the soil for a living, those who produce the food and the fiber to sustain life on this planet. To the extent that food is a common denominator among people of the world because everyone needs food, the presence of these guests signifies the extent to which we are winning the battle to bring nations closer together. We meet at a time when the President of the United States has instructed his disarmament chief to return to talks with the Russians about the mutual advantages of laying down weapons. I do not know, and I doubt that anyone knows, whether we can accomplish this with the Russians or they with us. But I most sincerely hope that our President will be successful in stopping this horrendous armament race which is taking substance from the world's populations and increasing the threat of a conflagration which may destroy us all this time. Surely there are millions who agree that this folly must be stopped. Surely there is some way to stop right now the pollution of our life-giving air and soil with death-dealing radioactive particles. Surely the genius which devised the atomic bomb, then went on to build the bigger hydrogen bomb, can be harnessed for devising some way to make their use and even their testing unnecessary. It has been encouraging to note the impact made recently on our thinking about the atomic bomb race by the great Albert Schweitzer, the Nobel Peace Prize winner and humanitarian who has been called the first citizen of the world. Dr. Schweitzer's declaration of conscience about the dangers to ourselves and posterity from radioactivity and the urgency of stopping our mad race with each other may be the voice necessary to make statesmen pause and consider their folly. The voice of this revered man, coming from a wilderness hospital where no cause but humanity has been served, can yet be a tremendous force of conscience on those who have been too busy to hear conscience. As Dr. Schweitzer put it, The end of further experiments with atomic bombs would be like the early sun rays of hope which suffering humanity is longing for. We are committing a folly and thoughtlessness, he says. We must muster the insight, the seriousness, and the courage to leave folly and to face reality. The specter of the atom bomb race is only the most gigantic of many reminders that we are today interdependent with other nations. In the blush of prosperity, some in the United States choose to ignore this basic fact, but it will not be ignored by the push of civilization and the laws of nature. We cannot long remain a citadel of a rapidly expanding economy with a rising standard of living and an increasing agricultural productivity if two-thirds of our neighbors continue to lack for the food, the clothing, and the basic individual freedoms which make a decent life possible. No responsible individual or organization in our nation can ignore the implications which their domestic programs and purposes have for this world challenge. The scientific developments of the past 20 years have blasted for all time any reality of isolationism. For in this, the second half of the 20th century, we live in a world geared to communication, rapid transportation, and interchange. The increasing intertwining of these relationships and responsibilities cannot be turned back like a clock, even if we so wished. Faced with these realities, we inevitably will direct more and more of our time and attention to the problems and concerns outside our nation, to those of the world community. We know now that we must hold fast to certain fundamental and basic concepts. First, that a vast majority of the people of the world are motivated by good. Second, that a peaceful world cannot be achieved through a pattern of unilateral and bilateral arrangements. It must be approached through the community approach of the United Nations. Third, that the present destructive capacity of individual nations makes peace and survival synonymous. Fourth, that the non-governmental organizations and groups of people, both at home and abroad, have a responsibility for giving form and substance to the attitudes of people, unburdened by the handicaps of formal diplomatic, governmental, and diplomatic protocol. These premises spell out for us much of our founding faith: the ultimate good in people, the essentiality of family and community, our peaceful purposes as tillers of the soil, and the importance of the loud, clear voice of citizenship in shaping the destiny of things to come. Against these fundamental premises that meet at our very roots, let me review for a brief moment some of the practical difficulties which have broken our stride toward a peaceful world. Our almost single-sided emphasis on the military drive for security through military strength has caused misapprehension and misunderstanding abroad. You will remember that the Truman Doctrine, spelling out the importance of the Point 4 program, spoke of the need to maintain and strengthen our defenses to give us time to pitch into the bigger job of raising the levels of living and the undergirding of individual freedoms abroad. When Secretary Dulles threatens massive retaliation and speaks of 3 times on the brink of war, we not only are misunderstood abroad, we are betraying the great cause of international cooperation and goodwill. Small wonder that a recent opinion poll in Calcutta showed that 38% of the Indians interviewed said that America was the nation most likely to start World War III, while only 2% selected the Soviet Union, 1% Communist China, and the rest didn't know. This seems incredible until we read that another survey in India showed that 86% of all the newspaper reference to the United States in a single month were wire service reports from America of statements and analysis by American officials and members of Congress on military matters: our newest atomic submarine, our far-flung air bases, our latest jets, our program of guided missiles. Thus, millions of Indians had come to think of us as a militaristic nation. I sincerely hope that our friends from India who are with us on this occasion will get no such impression. Certainly we must provide for national security. We yield to no one in our desire to maintain an adequate defense. Only a few days ago, I received a letter of thanks from President Dwight D. Eisenhower for supporting the Mutual Security Program. Here in part is what he said, quote, "In this recognition of the importance of strengthening the saving shield of freedom, you and your associates in the National Farmers Union give voice to America's determination to stand firmly against the menace of international communism." Defense and national security, as we all recognize, are essential components in our foreign policy. At the same time, however, let us look to the other broad considerations that we cannot ignore as we accept the responsibility of leadership among the free nations. The Cold War. For all the range of the administration's cool to lukewarm relations with the Soviet world, let us not lose sight of the fact that we are continuously engaged in Cold War. The dimensions of this Cold War are based on the fact that 1/6 of mankind live in nations which might be called advanced economically and socially, while 5/6 of the world's population live in a retarded and economically underdeveloped nations. We face the danger that the Soviet world, having undertaken to assist the underdeveloped countries, both bilaterally and through the United Nations, may make such causes taboo in the Western world. Today, in a world shrinking in time and space, we must be responsive to the needs of developing nations and the preservation of liberty in the minds of men throughout the free world. We must not be put in the position of defending an indefensible status quo, either with respect to our part in assisting the developing nations or in the work of the United Nations. Part of this dilemma may be seen in our selective or handmaiden use of the United Nations. We tend to take the expedient route, looking at a short-term view rather than basing our actions on the long pull. When it suits our purposes, for example, we move through the United Nations. When our individual short-term aims are more easily served through unilateral action, that is the avenue we pursue. It would have created a far better feeling of international understanding during the oil shortage in Western Europe caused by the Suez and pipeline blockage in the Middle East if we had sent oil through the avenues provided by the United Nations instead of the unilateral private avenues. Areas of critical adjustment. Other conditions which have made progress difficult, very difficult, on this highway to peace are the critical adjustments and vast upheavals in vast portions of the world. Lord John Boyd Orr, in his recent book, The White Man's Dilemma, puts it this way: the Western powers are faced with the rising waves of revolt in Asia, Africa, and Latin America against poverty. They can try to resist it by force or keep it off by the offer of technical assistance and trifling loans with political strings attached to them, which will break on the first strain. In that case, they will ultimately be destroyed or submerged. On the other hand, either with or without cooperation of the USSR, they could recognize the inevitable and use their overwhelming industrial superiority to create a new world of plenty. In so doing, they would gain a new power and prestige by assuming leadership in the march of the human family to the new age of peace and prosperity and the common brotherhood of man, which modern science has made the only alternative to the decline and fall of the Western civilization. Night after night, the voice of Moscow radio holds out the dreams of social revolution, supporting colonial struggles for independence, backing the non-white majority of the human race against all discrimination by the white minority, offering the use of their science and technology for rapid economic development. This goes on while we equivocate. It goes on apparently because we are uncertain of ourselves, whether the stakes are big enough, whether our resources are great enough, and we are up to our necks in the status quo thinking which conceives of the world as it was at the turn of the century. This is the challenge of our day. The use of our social as well as scientific skills, our goodwill, our belief in the brotherhood of man, And armed with these and the machinery by which we put our attitudes into action, we are challenged to make the most far-reaching, most important decisions we as a nation have ever made. In fact, it is a renewal of the decisions such as we made in launching the Marshall Plan or Point 4 assistance. Without following through these momentous positive decisions, our mantle of world leadership becomes shabby and tattered. Now more than ever before, it is important that our attitudes in the United States toward the developing areas of the world be far-sighted, just, and generous. Maximum utilization of the United Nations and its agencies. A direct alternative to the selective use of the United Nations of which I have spoken is the planned utilization of that body in every instance in which the community of nations is affected. This means a more direct and open approach to such critical nation-to-nation problems as are posed by the Arab-Israel dilemma in the Middle East or by the revolting Soviet satellite nations of Eastern Europe. It means persistent and all-out effort to bring atomic weapons under international control and to convert this scientific development into peaceful usage. It means a continuing vote of confidence in the work and purpose of the specialized agencies in the United Nations, with the ready acceptance of our financial commitment to them. Specifically, it means a basic reappraisal of the values inherent in the Food and Agriculture Organization, the only official avenue through which the nations of the world may jointly attack the problems of food and fiber production and balance. The specialized agencies such as FAO were not created idly. They should be used. They are action agencies, ready, available, and needing to be used. Members of the International Federation of Agricultural Producers have a unique opportunity to get these agencies used. We know the force for good which is unleashed when food is distributed amidst hunger, when grass is made to grow where soil was barren, when water runs over parched soil, when rural communities have a crop saved from disease. All of these things can be done through the machinery of the United Nations and its agencies if we will but do them. We should also end the equivocating use that we far too often have made of the United Nations itself for settlement of disputes. We can no longer hold the torch of leadership if we do not at the same time accept the limitations placed upon that leadership in the body of nations seeking the same goals and dreams we hold most sacred. Without the blood and muscles of programs which hold forth the means by which nations can become truly equal, the dream of the United Nations will fade under the impact of poverty, disease, and privation. Specific implementations to this end have received our enthusiastic and wholehearted support. The Special United Nations Fund for Economic Development is one which would make constructive use of our stockpile of food and fiber in the world's areas of need. All of the so-called surpluses, U.S. food and fiber production, would amount to but a drop in the bucket if the democratic nations should agree to use food to finance the progressive elimination of illiteracy in developing areas by establishing nationwide systems of free public schools for every child. The sun-fed proposal for the United Nations Development Agency is superior to anything we might do on a bilateral or a unilateral basis without the inevitable stigma of a giving and receiving a nation involved. We have also urged creation of an international food and raw material reserve. The objectives of the International Food and Raw Material Reserve are, first, to prevent extreme price fluctuation in the international commodity markets. 2, to prevent famine and starvation. 3, to help absorb temporary market surpluses of farm products and other raw materials. And 4, to build economic and social development programs in cooperation with appropriate international agencies. Another phase of this surge to bring equal economic development to the developing nations of the world has to do with the availability of developmental capital. While the Soviet Union, through its processes of dictatorship, can accumulate and apply such capital for foreign investment and development as it deems to be of national interest, we democratic nations have rising standards of living which soak up an increasing amount of risk capital in internal development, shortening the supply for foreign investment. We would not choose to slow up this process, which brings an increasingly fuller life to people, and we are keenly aware of the fact that much needs to be done in this country in the eradication of poverty and privation. Yet, unless we budget our capital capability and make possible capital investment abroad, we will surely one day find our citadel of economic well-being undermined by the ebbing tides of privation around us. To that end, I propose, 1, the setting aside of 1% of our gross national product each year in capital funds which can be budgeted for the United States investment abroad. 2, that these funds be made available as accumulated on 50-year loans to developing nations. Capital funds thus made available through our democratic processes to areas of economic need would stimulate the flow of private capital as the economies of recipient nations emerge as an increasingly better risk. Also, we are wholeheartedly in support of technical assistance abroad, and we feel that more of it should be done through the United Nations and its agencies. Technical assistance in the whole range of methods by which we, both as a nation and as a responsible member of the community of nations, come to the aid of developing nations with scientific, economic, political, and educational know-how. Technical assistance has no parallel in history as a stimulant to economic development. The United States is a dynamic center of the world economy. The trade and tariff concessions we grant to countries in the course of their development and their ensuing growth in world purchasing power as a result of this realistic trade policy will transform itself directly and indirectly into greater international demand for United States exports, including agricultural exports. There is, however, a larger meaning in this liberalization of our world trade policy, which is even more important. That is, that the rising standard of living throughout the world is geared to the degree to which the products of these countries may flow into export channels. Faced with unfavorable balance year upon year, the developing nations face an almost insurmountable task of lifting themselves by their own bootstraps. One of the most productive means by which international understanding is accomplished is through exchange of persons programs. We recommend the continuance and expansion of these programs. This is one area in which the bilateral activities are softened by the tendency of person-to-person relationships to seek out means of understanding and goodwill. Both programs under the United Nations agencies and the U.S. programs under ICA should be greatly expanded. And this brings us back to the honor reflected on us tonight by the presence of so many distinguished leaders from so many nations of the world. To get acquainted with a man is to understand him better. To get acquainted with a group of people is to understand all of them better. To get acquainted with a nation is to understand it better in a community of nations. And understanding is necessary before we can build together, prosper together, live in peace together, and raise our standards of living together. Let us therefore try to lead in the creation of a truly free world with political maturity, with economic intelligence, and with consideration for fellow men wherever they are located and whatever their race, religion, color, custom, or habit. Let us exercise leadership with social humility as we point with just pride to our productive powers. Let us stimulate the free flow of labor, of talent, of knowledge, and of ideas. Let us build together, for we are friends.
Thank you, James Patton, for your clear analysis of the objectives and the purposes of the United Nations. The one hope we have in the world to build understanding and a lasting peace. Again, we thank you, James Patton, for being with us. We are also privileged to have with us the Secretary of the Farmers' Forum of India, none other than Secretary Sharma, who's with us here at the platform. You have to get that close to the mic. That's right.
Mr. Chairman, brother farmers, ladies and gentlemen, I consider today a proud day of my life when I have the opportunity to convey to you, farmers of the state of South Dakota, greetings and message of friendliness and goodwill from your brothers, farmers of India. India, the colorful country of the Orient, cradle of a civilization as old as our memory could take us, and as gentle and noble as we could think of. It was this golden bird of the East, the object of curiosity for men in all parts of the world, that led to the discovery of your great land by Christopher Columbus in 1492. It has been a genuine pleasure for me and all my colleagues in the delegation from India to be in the land of a great and noble people who have not only made tremendous strides in the field of industry and agriculture, but who have succeeded to bring the science and all the comforts that science could procure to the doors of all their countrymen. Our pleasure, however, to be in the midst of you today is much greater, for we feel that in the hour of your glory and prosperity, you have not tried to forget your brothers in other parts of the globe, who, due to circumstances beyond their control, had to rest contented with less fortunate position in life. We from India belong to this class of this lesser fortunate people. During the struggle for independence, India has achieved something which it could be rightly proud of. This was the gospel of truth and non-violence, which was preached to us by the father of our nation, Mahatma Ghandi, the saint of Sevagram, who saw the light of the day 89 years from today in the west, a small town of Porbandar. It was not a new gospel, for did not Lord Buddha 2,500 years ago preach the same message, and 600 years after, Christ repeated the same words to the people. But our country, nay, the whole world, had forgotten this message. Gandhi gave to us the message of the world brotherhood, friendliness to all people, friend or foe. By this message alone, he roused the big nation, consisting of 375 millions, from its long slumber, and history bears the witness to the fact that without the shedding of a single drop of blood, he brought us to the threshold of freedom. The world is at present in a state of turmoil. Man has forgotten his duty towards man, and nations are busy testing nuclear weapons to wipe out the existence of another. Such a troubled world is in the dire need of the message which Mahatma Gandhi gave to it: respect for humanity and friendliness for all. We feel if this message is rightly practiced along with the cult of non-violence and truth, it will result in an everlasting peace to every one of us in the whole world. It is therefore with a feeling of extreme happiness that I, on behalf of all my colleagues and the Farmers Forum India, the organization of the Indian farmers, present to your worthy President, Mr. James Patton, whom we regard as the foremost farm leader of your country, who has made a real and substantial contribution for the well-being of the farmers of your country, a statue carved in ivory, often by an able craftsman of our country, of Mahatma Gandhi. This is, in appearance, a small gift, but in it is hidden the profundity of that dynamic message which will continue to inspire us all with a feeling of brotherhood towards all the peoples of the world, particularly those who are small and downtrodden. Dure pishrutva bhavadiya kirti karnau chatraptau nat chakshushi me tayor vivadam parivartanaya samagat oyam tav darshanaya. Mr. With these words, I thank you, Mr. Opesal, and members of the Farmers Union of South Dakota and other farmers of Dakota, and especially your President, Mr. Patton, for the hospitality which we had the pleasure to enjoy both at Denver and at Huron. And I request you now to kindly accept this small gift, a token of an everlasting friendship and goodwill between the farmers and the people of the two countries.
Mr. Sharma and members of the Indian delegation, I am very deeply touched by this wonderful gift, but more importantly, by what it symbolizes, and having had a great respect for Gandhi as one of the great leaders for peace in the world, it is especially important to me to receive this. And will you please convey to my brother farmers in India and all the people of India my best wishes and my love and respect.
Thank you very much, Secretary Sharma of the Farmers' Forum of India. I know that we are especially favored here tonight, and he's the last speaker on our program, a very distinguished gentleman from the United Kingdom. He's National President of the Farmers' Union of the United Kingdom, and he has recently informed me that 95% of the commercial farmers in that country belongs to the Farmers' Union. Well, that's a good majority, isn't it? A very good percentage of the farmers in that country. And I think rightfully they can be proud of their agricultural pursuit because they are the most progressive, mechanized agriculture in the world, numbering in tractors and farm equipment of any country in the world. He is also the founder of I.A.P. and its first president. So it gives me a lot of pleasure at this time to present to you Sir James Turner of the United Kingdom.
President Upsall, Congressman McGovern, friends, this is indeed a great cloud of witness. You are here because you wish to testify to the importance of the United Nations and the United Nations organization. By your very presence here, you are displaying an interest in internationalism, an indication that you are anxious to be participants in that ever-growing world family on which the future peace of the world is entirely dependent. May I at the outset, Mr. Patton, President Patton, congratulate you and indeed thank you also for the statesmanlike, thought-provoking, and torch-bearing address that you've given us and the message that it contained. When I see such a great company here, and I recall the earlier proceedings, when indeed I understand from President Upsall